Granny Rhea.
And I'm Auntie Donia.
And we're here to talk about super special kids and cake.
Yes, cake!
We're coming to you from the studios of Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. This podcast is brought to you by our book, Let's Talk, Social Communicative Services and Supports for Your Young Child with ASD, published by Paul H. Brooks and available from Amazon.
As you know, every week we introduce a super special topic, something that we have been thinking about and would like to share with you. These topics are of professional interest to us, but they're also topics that come up in our clinical practice. They're things we don't always agree about, but we do enjoy talking about them.
And as Granny Rhea said, we don't always agree, but what we both really enjoy is the research. But we also find that it's really important for you as parents of super special kids to know what the research says, and we like to translate that research into everyday practical strategies.
Well, Auntie Donia, our super special topic for today is screen time. Got anything to say about that?
I certainly have. So, as you may remember, it was Oscar's birthday earlier in the month, and he's only 8. And do you know what he asked me for?
No, what did he ask you for?
An iPhone.
You're kidding.
Yep, he wanted the brand new iPhone. I got my first iPhone when I was 19.
Don't even ask me how old I was. They didn't even invent them till I was 40.
So, what does the research say about screen time?
Well, there's not a whole lot of research, but the things that I've read suggest that there really is a difference between seeing something on a screen and seeing it in person. Some studies that have looked at what kids can learn in terms of language, words, and so on from watching something on a screen and watching a person do the same thing suggest that working with a person makes a huge difference. There's something about the ability to actually interact and change the other person's behavior that makes a big difference in learning. You probably know, Auntie Donia, that the American Academy of Pediatrics has suggested that children under the age of 2 not watch any screens at all except to Skype with their grandparents.
Which we both love doing, don't we? It's my favorite thing to do is FaceTime and Skyping with the little ones. But having said that, we also know we're not saying not to use screens at all, but once children are at the age where it's developmentally suggested that they use screens, there are actually quite a few apps and tools out there that can be great and can actually encourage social engagement and teach lots of different language concepts. I have a couple of favorite ones.
Oh, what are they?
So one of my favorite ones is called Timmy Tickle, and it's an interactive little story about this octopus called Timmy Tickle. And at the beginning, he's feeling kind of sad, and you see this sad orange-faced octopus. But when you tickle him, he starts giggling and his tentacles start wriggling around. And I love it because it's something that I can do with the younger children, and they see that cause-effect relationship. So it's a little bit like one of those sort of pop-up books.
Yeah. And of course, kids do enjoy the activity on the screen because there is a lot of cause-effect involved. It's a way that they can control what happens, which for little kids doesn't take place so often.
So as long as you're considering developmentally appropriate technology, we're okay with using screen times at the right time and in the right amount of time. One of the other story apps I really like is What Does My Teddy Bear Do at Night? And it also is interactive, but it doesn't have any of that sort of jingly music in the background. So you can read it to the child, and you can also change the language settings. So with my nieces and nephews, 2 of them are actually trilingual, so they'll often change the setting to the German setting so that they can read about the teddy bear at nighttime too.
Oh, that sounds wonderful, Donia. And, speaking of being trilingual, it really is great for kids to learn other languages when they're little, isn't it? Doesn't it really make the learning easier?
It really does. And when you're using these different tools where they're engaged and it's enjoyable for them, they don't have anything negative associated with it. The language learning then is really fun and it's part of their everyday routine.
And that's the key, isn't it? To make it part of everyday life. Now, Of course, there are lots of wonderful things that can happen with apps and screens and so on, especially when parents interact with the child around the toy. But we want to make sure that kids get lots of chances to play with other things too. Things that have 3 dimensions, things that can roll across the floor.
Absolutely, because it's through that exploration that they really learn what their little fingers can do, what they see, how things feel. And Granny Rhea, another time where I think screens really shouldn't be there at all is at the dinner table.
Oh, that's very true. Or phones of any kind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Too many people spend dinner looking at the phone instead of talking to each other.
And I know that sometimes with super special kids, if you want to go out for brunch or you're going out for lunch, you want to feel that your child can be engaged in doing something, but taking their favorite book with you or taking something for them to color can be more engaging than having an iPad or a telephone out. And of course, the best is to have a conversation.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Now, we know that some super special kids do need the iPhone or the iPad to keep them content in a public space, and certainly parents can take advantage of that. But we just want to make sure that the child has other opportunities, especially around home meals, to interact face-to-face.
So, Granny Rhea, let's see what one of our listeners has sent us for today's super special question.
One of our listeners sent us a great super special question today, Auntie Donia. And what they say is, you've been talking so much about having fun with your kids and following their lead. But what about when they're naughty? Can I ever scold my super special child or say no to them?
You're right. That's something that families often do ask us. And I was actually only just recently asked this question where a mum had been spending some special time with her super special kid, and they were playing together. But at the same time, there were times in the day where she needed the kids to be out of the house with their backpacks, shoes, coats on, and in the car to get them to school. And what we spoke about is the importance of positive directives. And what that means is you're telling your child what you want them to do rather than what you don't want them to do. So
that's so important, Auntie Donia, because you can achieve the same result with very different language, and that language makes a difference in how the child feels.
And so you want to make sure that you're making your expectations really clear. So if you want to say to them, it's time we've got to leave in a couple of minutes. I want you to pick up your backpack, get your coat, and we're going into the car. That's more productive than saying, come on, we're going to be late.
Or to say, stop what you're doing. You didn't put your shoes on, to always try to phrase it in a positive way. Another thing I've found that helps, Auntie Donia, is to give choices. So asking the child if they want to take their pink backpack or their blue backpack.
And that's actually a good time at nighttime too, when they're watching one of their favorite shows and it's time to get ready to go to bed, where you can say, do you want 5 more minutes to watch the show, or should we turn it off and go read a story?
Yeah, that's a great idea because both choices are positive. What about if a child is really naughty, though, Auntie Donia? What about if they throw something or spill something intentionally? How do you handle that?
Well, we've got to make sure that we're not giving the child too much attention. But at the same time, it's really important for the child to know what's expected. And so if they've spilt something, there's nothing wrong with saying, pick it up, wipe the table, and sometimes you do have to say no. I think if a child's hitting or if they're doing something dangerous, when you occasionally use a word no and you really mean it, children know that you mean business.
Yeah, I think that's really important. If you're not saying no all the time, then when you do say it, it has more weight, doesn't it?
It really does. And I know for me, my nieces and nephews know me as Fun Auntie Donia. And the very rare time that I've had to say no, they pause and stop. And I don't have to say it again. Now, we also know that with some of our super special kids, it takes longer for them to learn. And so it's really important that you are, of course, we know that you're patient with them, but that also you make your expectations clear, but you follow up on what you say you're going to do. So if you say to them, if you don't put your shoes on, we're not going out, but you are going out because you have to go out, then you're not going to be able to follow through on that. And then they won't really relate it and understand that what you say is what you mean.
Exactly. Now, Auntie Donia, you have a lot of background in behavioral strategies. What kind of behavioral strategies would you suggest for times when children are naughty or won't listen?
I think it's also to look at the times when they are listening. So we want to make sure, first of all, that you catch them being good. So whenever they're being appropriate, if you've said, pick up your backpack, and they've done it, to reinforce them. And when we say reinforce, you're giving them attention by verbally praising them and using their name. So you would say, well done, Oscar, you picked up your bag, or thank you for listening to Mummy. And then the times that they're not, there are times actually you should ignore. Certain behaviours need to be ignored. If your child is fidgeting or if they are repeating something, that's okay to ignore. But then there are, of course, other things that you can't ignore that instead you want to direct them and let them know what to do. We sometimes will use reward charts. So the child knows that when they've done something, they get a sticker or they get a reward, but they really have to have the cognitive understanding to know that that token represents something. And to also know that, for example, once they've collected 5 stickers or 5 stars, that they then have a special reward at the end of it. One of the things to be careful of, though, is not to threaten them to say that you're going to remove it or that they're going to, they can climb up the ladder, but you don't want them to go down the ladder. It just means that they won't move up any further.
Yeah, that's great advice, Auntie Donia. And I think that parents need to think about how can they reward their child's behavior. And those rewards are really individual, aren't they? Something that's rewarding for one child might not be rewarding for another. One child might love listening to a music box as a reward, but another child might find that completely uninteresting. So it's really crucial for parents to identify what their kids really like and to use those things to help shape the child's behavior.
And the more that you know what your child's interests are, the more that you can do that as well.
Auntie Donia, there are so many myths and misconceptions in working with children with developmental disabilities. And some of them are so absurd, they just make us go, arghhh! You know what makes me go, arghhh, Auntie Donia?
What is it, Granny Rhea?
It's when parents take their kids' sensitivities and let them rule their life. Like there's the child that doesn't like to hear the vacuum cleaner, so nobody ever vacuums.
So the floor never gets cleaned?
Right, exactly. Or the child who's sensitive to light, so the house is always totally dark. There are other ways to handle it, aren't there?
There really are, and it doesn't help, does it? Because you can't go through life with turning all the lights out and avoiding all noise. And reducing the sensitivity can be done by introducing other sounds. And I think, like you said, I think sometimes we're anticipating that a child may not like something when we've not even tried it.
That's very true. But even when we know a child doesn't like something, there are ways to desensitize them to that dislike. For example, with a vacuum cleaner, if a child's afraid of the sound of a vacuum cleaner, you can make a recording of your vacuum and then turn the volume down really, really low and play it while the child is playing. So it's so low volume they hardly hear it. And then gradually you can increase the volume so that the child begins to become accustomed to this sound and can eventually tolerate it. It may take a while, but, it really helps the child to learn, I can cope. I don't have to be ruled by these sensitivities that I have.
And I think that's really important because what we're teaching them is that they can cope and what they can do to help themselves and to adjust. And sometimes even going back to that vacuum example, it's just taking the vacuum out and leaving it in the room.
Right, even without turning it on, so they just get used to seeing it there. Yeah. And then introducing the soft version of the sound and building. It does take time and some thought and some planning, but it's so much better than living without ever being able to vacuum your house.
Right, exactly.
Let me give you an example from my granddaughter. I very stupidly bought my son and daughter-in-law a Roomba because they thought they could turn it on at night and vacuum the house and it wouldn't bother anybody. But my granddaughter became fascinated with this thing that sat in the corner and didn't do anything, and she began trying to play with it. And one day she turned it on by accident, and she was terrified. It started making noise, and it started moving around the room. And after that, for quite a while, she would just cringe whenever she even saw the thing. So I decided I needed to desensitize her, and I did exactly what I just talked about. And now she loves the Roomba. She thinks it's her best friend.
And I think that's really important, Granny Rhea. So it's not just our super special kids that struggle with this desensitization. Our typical kids do as well.
Right, and the point is that none of us need to be governed by our weakest tendencies. We can all build up the strength, and our super special kids can do it too.
Granny Rhea, there is nothing wrong with eating cake for breakfast.
You are so right, Auntie Donia, and we're going to be talking about some things that are as much fun as eating cake for breakfast.
Do you know, I love bath time. It's one of my favorite routine activities that we can do with children because there are so many wonderful things that children can learn, but most of all, it's fun. And I was in Riyadh last week. I was working with a family who have a 3-year-old with autism. And it's really interesting. He has his bath time in the morning. So for him, bath time is still fun, but it's about him getting ready for his day. Whereas I do bath time with my nieces and nephews when I'm back in London, and it's in the evening, and it's all about getting them ready for bed.
Yeah, it really functions differently depending on where you do it, but different when you do it. But different cultures really do have different attitudes about some of these routines. The important thing is, though, that we have routines in our kids' lives because they help to organize the child's day and they know what to expect. It's an important way that they learn language through these routines. For example, my daughter-in-law just sent me this wonderful video of my granddaughter in the bath. She's not quite a year old yet. And her mother is saying to her, "Show me how you wash yourself." And without any other cues, the baby picks up the washcloth and starts rubbing her neck. And I was just so excited. I'm thinking, oh, she understands her first word. So part of what she learned through that fun activity is that word wash goes with a certain action.
And what I loved about that video was that your daughter-in-law was using language to comment on what the baby was doing. So it was such a great way to pair the actions with the words. And all she had in the bathtub was a little rubber ducky and another floaty toy. And yet they were both so happy, so engaged, and it was such a language-rich environment.
Yeah, we sometimes forget that all those things we do throughout the day, whether it be getting dressed or eating or bathing or getting on the school bus. This applies for older kids as well. We all have routines that organize our day. And if parents can think about how to use those routines as a context or a setting for teaching language skills, interactive skills, social skills, they become really valuable resources.
And I think especially that with so many parents who are working and lead such busy lives, when you have a super special kid, I know that some of the parents will often share with me that they feel guilty that they don't have the time to be with their children. And yet using these routines like bath time can be so valuable for teaching communication and lots of other great language and cognitive related tasks. And it's fun. It's generally relaxing, unless you get soaked with water and you're not too happy about that. But I think most parents of super special kids don't really mind that. But it is worth remembering that those routines are great opportunities for learning.
They are great opportunities for learning, but they're also great opportunities for fun and interacting. And I think we don't want to forget that. We want parents to feel enabled, to feel empowered, to take that time and say, this is my quality time with the child. It doesn't have to be really super exotic. It's just what goes on every day. And if what goes on every day is fun and engaging and loving, then it's going to be best for everybody.
That's so true. That's so true. So What is our super special cake of the day?
Today, Auntie Donia, we have some creme brulee cake. I've never had creme brulee cake, but it looks really delicious. It's got lots of cinnamon on top, and it's a beautiful golden color. Have you got your fork?
I have.
All right, let's take a taste.
Dig in.
Oh, boy. Oh, the crust is so nice and crunchy.
Oh, and it's gluten-free too. Oh,
It's gluten-free.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Okay.
That is really good. The Let's Talk About Super Special Kids and Cake podcast would like to thank our host, Sacred Heart University's School of Communication and Media Studies. We'd also like to thank our composer, Marty Eisenberg, our editor, Brent, and our audio engineer and director of cake-based operations, Matt Henshaw.